what I call it. I'm wearing the ini apa ini baju wisuda ini, the wearing of the graduation uniform. Yes. I think so. On one behalf, the Chancellor Director University of Madya Malang, I would like to give the high appreciation to the head of Department Social Welfare, because you can hold the great conference, and you can invite the Professor Eric and also Bu Dewi. I think it's the good first step, because we would like to explore, we would like to create, we would like to develop the collaboration, both personally or institutionally. So please, I would like to invite Professor Eric Hardiman to come to my campus, physically, not virtually, maybe in the next year. Because Bauman has a good spirit to create, to develop the collaboration with some institution in outside, in oversight, including with your institution. So hopefully you can attend physically to UMM, besides provide the guys lecture, and also maybe we can signing the collaboration between your department and in the department of Pak Oman Sukmana. So once again, thank all. I'm so sorry because I'm Harry. The committee organizing inviting me to prepare to attend to the graduation. Mbak Dewi, makasih Mbak Dewi ya. Saya minta maaf.
Sama-sama Prof. Ya, sama-sama.
Harry, okay, thank you. Okay, let's saying basmalah together to start this event. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. That's all. Good morning and good afternoon. Good evening for New York. Okay, thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
I'm so sorry. I'm in hurry.
Right. Thank you to Professor Dr. Syamsul Arif. Thank you for Professor Dr. Syamsul Arifin for the speech and the opening. Now, ladies and gentlemen, finally we come to the main point on this meeting. This is a virtual international guest lecture, being an international social worker, how its role, opportunity, and challenge, which will be delivered by Professor Eric Hardiman from School of Social Work, University at Albany State University of New York, and Dr. Habib as moderator. To Professor Eric, screen is yours.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone for being here. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me?
No, excuse me. I'm a moderator, so I will introduce you first. Sorry, Professor.
It's okay.
Okay. Yeah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. As a moderator, I just want to introduce myself. That I had been studying at Ann Arbor a long time ago, in 1985 to 1987, for master degree. So I stayed in America for 2 years. Okay, now I'm a lecturer here. So before we start the lecture, I would like to introduce Mr. Professor Eric Hardiman. Actually, there is a very long CV, curriculum vitae is about 14 pages altogether, but I don't want to read all of them. It's too long. So I just want to introduce complete name of the professor is Professor Eric R. Hardiman, PhD, from the University at Albany, State University of New York, and School of Social Work. The professor had been very special in his career because he can finish so many writing, 11 books, for example. So many books, 11 books, and 23 articles. 2 book chapters, 9 monographs, 2 fellowship award, 3 books reversed, and 27 papers, and 14 presentation, and 30 grant founded. So this is really perfect. Really so many. So I appreciate that you have been very good in your career. Okay. Because I have been in America, so sometimes it's not easy to understand American English, even for me. So would you like to speak a little bit slowly, not slowly, not very slowly, but a little bit slow. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, screen is yours. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If I speak too fast or too quietly, please feel free to interrupt and let me know. Selamat pagi.
Selamat pagi.
Selamat pagi.
Nama saya Eric Hardiman. Saya sangat senang berada di sini bersama Anda semua, meskipun melalui teknologi jarak jauh dan tidak secara langsung. Merupakan suatu kehormatan besar bagi saya diundang untuk berbicara dengan Anda semua hari ini. Semoga kita semua bisa belajar bersama dari pengalaman ini. I hope that was okay.
It's okay.
Good job. Awesome.
Indonesian.
Just a little bit. No.
Very perfect. Okay.
Okay, now that we have that out of the way, I'm very excited to be here. And, I just quickly want to thank Professor Oman for inviting me and Dewi Kartika Waningsi for setting this up and for, she's a student of mine here at the University of Albany and for setting up this lecture. I'm very excited about it. So let's see if I have, you say I have the screen. Can I share? I can, okay, let's see. Oh, is it possible for me to share a PowerPoint? Slides?
Prof. Oman.
So,
Jadikan co-host Mas Eko, Pak Prof. Hardiman.
Assalamualaikum.
Sudah jadikan co-host?
here we go. Okay, good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry for that.
That's okay. No problem. I should have asked in advance. Okay. So let's see if this works. Okay. So I'll go here to share screen. Okay. Can you see that?
Okay.
It's clearly.
Clearly.
Okay, very clear.
Okay. So we'll just move beyond that quickly. So just in terms of what we will talk about today, and I'll try to keep this to 45 minutes. I have a lot of slides, so if I don't get through all of the slides, I will send the slides for your viewing afterwards. So quick introduction, we'll define international social work, maybe talk about a little brief history of international social work, Indonesian context, although you are the experts in that. We'll talk about the current context in which international social work takes place, whether it is a challenge or an opportunity, talk about some international perspective, and then some of the different roles and challenges for social workers. Very quickly, I won't spend much time on this, but just so you know what my research interests are, my research interests have been involved in mental health services, psychiatric recovery, homelessness and housing, disaster relief, gun violence and related violence here in the US, and then work with military veterans. And through all of these topics, my main interest, my over the thread that goes through all of my research is the notion of peer support, which some people will call mutual aid, and involves processes of inclusion and involvement. And using Bahasa Indonesia, we might call gotong royong, the idea of working together in unity with reciprocity. So that's all of the work that I've done, and my research and scholarship involves gotong royong in some way or another. My interest in Indonesia is quite a long history. So I have a long time, maybe 20, 25-year history of interest in the arts and culture of Indonesia. I spent over 10 years playing gamelan, both Solanese style from Java, and then also Balinese gong kebyar style of music. I've traveled to Java twice, and I'll tell you about these later in the lecture. The first was in 2005 in February, following the tsunami that happened in late 2004, where I delivered a 5-day workshop in Jakarta on post-disaster trauma work with children. And that was invited by the Ministry of Sport and the Ministry of Social Affairs in Jakarta. I went back 2 years later in February of 2007, where I went to Bandung. I should have said Bandung, but I spent the second trip in Bandung, where I delivered a training on working with youth and trauma at UPI, Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia, and also worked with UNPAD, with Pajajaran, Universitas Pajajaran, and a local yayasan in Bandung called the Harry Rusli Foundation. In addition to those trips, I also, over the years, have supervised a number of Indonesian graduate students here in Albany, both at the master's level and at the PhD level, and Dewi is a good example. But we have a history at the University of Albany of hosting Indonesian students, and we've had Indonesian students in our program almost every year for the past 15 years. So that's been very exciting, and it's kept me in touch with Indonesian culture. So is this okay? Can everybody understand my English?
Yep.
Okay, good. I know you can, Dewi. We live in a shrinking globe. It's a very interesting time right now. And when I think about the social work profession, I think we are poised at a precipice. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. But we live in a globe that is shrinking. We are increasingly connected to each other, and there's increasing interdependence between nations. We can see that in the last 2 years with the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, which affected every corner of the globe in maybe different ways based on resources, based on health patterns, based on behavioral patterns. But this is a pandemic that was global, right? And it affected everybody. And so we start to see, particularly coming out of the pandemic, what the connections are between nations. And we start to see that our globe is shrinking. So I want to talk about what social work is. And I know many of you are social work students, others are social work lecturers. And so you have a good idea what social work is in Indonesia. And maybe some of you have studied in the US, or you've studied in Australia or elsewhere. But social work, some of the preconceptions about it, I would like to correct, that it's not just charity. It's not just helping other people, and it's not just treatment, and it's not just intervention or social control and social protection. So then the question becomes, if it's not just these things, although it might have elements of those things, the question becomes, what is social work really? And there's a lot of different ways to define it, but I'll use the International Federation for Social Work, IFSW, which I'll talk about in a minute. I'll use that for a definition. And they say that social work is a practice-based profession. So it has a practical component to it. It involves social workers engaged in practice. Practice-based profession and an academic discipline that promotes social change and development, social cohesion, and the empowerment and liberation of people. So I won't read all of this, but some of the pieces of this that are important are that social work engages communities and it engages people to address the various life challenges that they face, the various social challenges faced in communities, and to enhance well-being and promote social justice. So we start to see when we look at that, that some of the very ideas around health, wellness, economic well-being, human rights, social justice, those issues really are universal. And as I said, with COVID impacting the whole globe, we also see that the same types of social problems and social issues affect countries and communities throughout the world. And so while there are significant differences in culture and region, the commonalities of the social problems that countries face are important. And so social work has the opportunity, it doesn't always do this, but it has the opportunity to intervene with those commonalities. And please let me know if I'm going too fast. So social work in Indonesia, and this is, again, you are the experts in this, much more than I am, just having visited twice. The social work profession has been through what Professor Oman termed in an email to me a long journey. Essentially, following independence in 1945 of Indonesia, there's been educational processes, training processes, tremendous progress and development nationally, but still a number of issues that the profession faces, just like the profession faces similar issues here in the United States and elsewhere, in Europe, in other parts of Asia, in Africa. Anywhere you go, many of these issues are experienced. Issues around resources for the profession and resources for social workers, the need for standardization, regulation, accreditation, the role of government, the nature of curricula, the nature of field work. I know that in Indonesia, for example, it's my understanding that field work is a challenge in social work, that it's difficult to find supervisors and it's difficult to find field sites. We face similar issues here in the United States, surprisingly, where field education, which we think of as the central pedagogy of social work, the place where, the locus where social work education really takes place, we have difficulty finding placements as well. Indigenization is a challenge in many countries, certainly a challenge in Indonesia, I know, making sure that social work education properly involves indigenous communities, local communities, village communities. Indonesia, as everyone on the call knows, is a nation characterized by tremendous diversity, geographic diversity, cultural diversity, religious diversity. You know, it's known for its diversity, and that makes the need for indigenization even more important. The need for a social work practice and a social work profession that does not just provide services from a mainstream perspective, but that also provides services in a way that is culturally congruent for all communities, for all parts of Indonesia, and for all populations and all groups and subgroups in Indonesia. So as you know, there's many stakeholders. There may be limited societal understanding of what social work really is. We face that in the US. Many people in the United States do not have a clear idea what social workers do or what social work is. And so the identity of social workers themselves is still forming, even here in the United States. After 100+ years of social work, we're still figuring out what it means to be a social worker and what it means to have that identity of social worker. So that's just a little Indonesian context. So some of the more global contextual features, and again, I'll try to go through this relatively quickly, but hopefully not talking too fast. There are various political, economic, cultural, and social factors which affect, as I said, they affect the globe, they affect the global community, they affect national communities, and they affect local communities, but in unequal ways. So economic forces, for example, may have an impact on the United States in a much different way than economic factors have an impact on a developing nation. And so we start to see that. I think, okay, does someone have a question? Okay. So we start to see that the unequal consequences mean that there are inequities. And we start to see that there's income inequality that gets expanded, health disparities, economic challenges, climate change, environmental disasters, oppression, discrimination, infringement of human rights. All of these things which affect the globe and which affect nations also affect local communities, cities, towns, villages, regions, areas, islands, in your case, but in much different ways. And so what we start to see is that, particularly economically, but not just economically, also politically, socially, culturally, there is the forces, what I think of as the forces of globalization. So those forces which bring our economy closer together, which include multinational corporations, they include, an increasingly global economy and a globally interdependent economy, has a very negative byproduct, which is the marginalization of large groups of people, the standardization of groups of people, sometimes due to stereotypes, sometimes due to income inequality. And so this marginalization is particularly impacting people in poverty, communities in poverty, as well as Indigenous and First Nation populations and persons. And so as social workers, we need to be aware of this. So this is what I'm trying to do now, is paint a picture of the context in which international social work is relevant. So we've seen in the last 2 years, over 2 years now, the global COVID-19 pandemic is an overarching experience for the entire globe. It's a source of challenge. It's a source of, it drains resources. It leads to isolation. It leads to, health outcomes. We're starting to learn more and research more about what those negative outcomes will be over time. But COVID-19 also brings with it what I see as a source of opportunity. And so I think of it this way, that challenge often brings opportunity. And I would like to think that social work is a profession, and all of you who are on this call who are social work students, I am so proud of you for joining the social work profession, for choosing the social work profession, for wanting to become social workers, because social workers see opportunity in challenge. They take situations which involve limitations, challenge, difficulty, hardship, suffering, and they see those as opportunities to make meaningful change. And that's important. That means taking a situation that is negative, looking for the connections, looking for interconnections, looking for opportunities and for networking, looking for ways to build more effective systems of care to better the lives of our communities. And so this current context globally is such that if social work as a profession is not working globally, if it's not working internationally, if it only works, if it only works at the local level, we're missing a tremendous opportunity. We're missing an opportunity for connection and change and exchange of ideas, inclusion and accessibility. We also have, and tonight is, or this morning, for me it's tonight, for you it's this morning, we have technology. So we have Zoom, we have Google, we have Facebook and FaceTime, and we have these ways to connect with each other through technology and communicate in ways that we did not have before. And so that's another opportunity for inclusion and for exchange of ideas. Social work as a profession occupies a very unique place globally. And some of the reasons, not all of the reasons, but some of the reasons why social work is unique, it's agenda driven. So it has an agenda, it has a purpose, it's meaningful. It is value-based. So it's based on, a set of core values and principles. It's multidimensional. So it works at multiple levels, often at the same time. Working with individuals, working with families, working with communities, working with local areas, and in the US it's states, in Europe it's probably regional configurations in Indonesia, whether it's West Java, East Java, wherever it might be, or Sumatra, Bali, wherever it might be. We have multiple interrelated and interconnected layers, which go all the way to the global level. And that's the beauty of social work, is that it does not exist only at one level, it exists at multiple levels. Social work is incredibly complex. So it's a profession that to outsiders may look simple. It may look like the provision of charity or the provision of help to other people. It may look like relief, the provision of relief, which in some ways it is, but it's also very complex in the sense that it involves much more that's going on beneath the surface. And social work is also innovative. So social work is innovative in the sense that it leads to greater change. Individual change, family change, social change. It involves what we call in the United States thinking outside of the box, thinking creatively, being a problem solver, not being hindered by current practice, but looking toward future paradigms, building future paradigms. And so some of the ways it does that are through political strategies, educational strategies, and then of course, direct practice strategies. At all levels of social work, it is important to emphasize the notion of human capital. And essentially, I'm trying to emphasize here the idea that human beings are the best resource that we have on the globe. So we can talk about natural resources, we can talk about fuel, we can talk about money and economy, we can talk about products that are created, but essentially human capital individual human capital and social capital are the building blocks of a better future. They're the building blocks of success globally. And so social work, from my perspective, should always be looking in a capacity building manner. So looking to improve the capacity of human capital, to improve the capacity of individuals and families, to improve the capacity of neighborhoods and communities and social support networks, improve their capacity that they can help each other. So rather than having social workers provide help, the idea is that, and this goes back to Gotong Royong and social support, mutual aid, peer support. The idea is to improve the capacity of communities to help themselves, to better themselves, to build a better future. I'm going to skip some of this quickly, but this is important just to say that social workers have the ability to define the roles that we play in our profession. And that seems like maybe a strange thing to say, because as students, you're being taught what social workers do, and you're being taught what are the roles of social workers. Social workers help individuals, they help families, they help create policy, they help advocate for change, they help educate when education is needed. But there are new roles for social work that have not yet been created. There is a future for social work that has not been created yet. It's being written right now. And so I think of the social work jobs of the next 5 years are jobs that we hopefully cannot even envision right now. They're jobs through which social workers are creating those jobs. They are envisioning, imagining, and building those jobs. And so I hope to send a message to each of you to feel empowered that even though you may get a job working for an agency, working for a government organization, working for an NGO, even though you may work within a traditional social service structure, you still have the ability to help write the future of social work and to help think differently about how social work moves into the future. But when we do this, our central goal has to be promoting human welfare, promoting social justice, and not just treating individual problems. And so one of the places, without being too negative, one of the places where social work has really had a challenge over the years, particularly here in the United States, is that social work gets bogged down in helping individuals. And sometimes the focus is so heavily on the treatment of individual problems, which are important and are pressing and are, need intervention. But when social work focuses too much on those, it runs the risk of losing sight of human capital, social justice, larger human welfare issues, human rights. And so all of this is a reminder that social work, the first word of social work is social. That it is not just about helping individuals, but it is about the fabric of a community, the social fabric of a nation, and indeed the social fabric of our whole globe. Very quickly, I'll share some ideas building on what I just said, moving beyond traditional helping roles in social work. Social workers can be boundary spanners, where social workers move beyond boundaries. They move beyond national borders, local borders. They can move beyond state borders. They can move beyond systemic boundaries. Social workers are able to, here in the United States, they interact with the legal system, with the judicial system, with policymakers, with housing, with healthcare systems, with educational systems. And so social workers serve as a bridge between multiple systems. And that puts us in a unique spot as a profession because we span everything. We have the ability to touch multiple systems. And that's the increasing complexity I talked about. And when you add in a global and international perspective, we start to see that spanning boundaries is a critical process in social work. Social workers are change agents. I've talked about that, but social workers push for social transformation and community growth. So we look for things like program design, inclusive decision-making. When I talked about indigenization, one of the things that's very, very exciting about new ways of doing social work are those that involve inclusive decision-making, where people that receive services, communities that receive aid, also help design the support that they receive.
Excuse me, Professor.
Yes.
Wait, I just want to check the audiences. Bagaimana bisa memahami nggak ini mahasiswa terutama? Ada yang menjawab? Tapi jangan khawatir, nanti ini semua kami terjemahkan dan kami akan bagikan kepada Anda dalam bentuk mungkin soft copy, ya. Sehingga jangan khawatir. Yang penting Anda siapkan pertanyaan-pertanyaan, nanti bisa nulis di chat atau langsung bertanya. Bisa pakai bahasa Inggris, bisa pakai bahasa Indonesia. Saya kira itu supaya kita lebih paham tentang begitu banyaknya fungsi social work di dalam kehidupan masyarakat modern. Okay, go on, Professor. Sorry for interruption.
No, that's okay. Please feel free. Should I move slower, or is it okay?
Yeah, go on.
Okay, great. So social workers are change agents. Social workers engage in advocacy. They engage in education. And what I will say about education that's tremendously important, it's not always traditional education in social work. So social workers need to embrace social media. They need to embrace traditional media, radio, television, internet. Social workers have a responsibility in the future to engage with the media, to think of the media, to think of, the way I think about it is that I think of society as a client. And if social attitudes and beliefs and values are not where we would like to see them in social work, social workers have a role to play to educate the public. The public is the client. And so that means engaging in Twitter, engaging in, whatever the social media technologies might be, but to educate others through our social work. And then finally, social workers are connectors, that we work on network development, principles of mutual aid and empowerment, that we try to build supportive communities by connecting resources. All of this, I'm sure you know already, but I think it's an important context before we get to the international piece. So also beyond helping just some sort of principles of social work, promoting inclusion, I talked about, so including populations that social work serves, making sure that we don't intervene in a top-down format, but we intervene in a way that involves the people we are helping. Eradicating, so we're looking for inclusionary processes, to promote inclusionary processes, and to eradicate exclusionary processes. So when people with disabilities, for example, are excluded, we work to include them. When people in poverty are excluded from discourse, we hope to include them instead of exclude them. Those are just a few examples. Economic independence. Economics is an area of social work that's perhaps better understood in countries like Indonesia and better understood in some developing countries than it is in the United States and in the Western world of social work. In the Western world of social work, we talk about treatment, intervention, and we don't often talk about economics. And so it's increasingly important for social workers to fight for economic independence, to fight for support economic literacy for the people we work with, for example, to help people find jobs, create jobs, and to become economically independent is equally important, if not more important, than treating things like psychological challenges and mental health problems, trauma issues. Yes, those are important, but economics are equally important. Just like we know that the social determinants of health, we've learned that so many things beyond our traditional view of what impacts health are really important. So it's not just, it's not just the traditional issues that relate to health and wellness, but social determinants are also part of that equation. Looking for environmental justice, social justice, equality, social cohesion. And then I think social workers and Dewi and I, will emphasize this because, of our position as researchers, but the idea of knowledge generation is important, that all of you as social workers, as you become social workers, as you qualify to become social workers, will be and should be involved in knowledge generation. That means that as you engage in social work practice, you're generating knowledge. That knowledge should be shared with others. That means writing about it, talking about it, presenting it, working with researchers. There's a notion of the social worker researcher, the practitioner researcher, someone who does both. They engage in social work practice, but they also engage in research, and they do so in intertwined ways. So everything they do as a practitioner generates knowledge, and that knowledge gets shared with others. So that starts to build us into international social work too. So moving beyond the pandemic of the last 2 years, as we start to come out of the pandemic, hopefully, and start to look toward a post-pandemic future, a new future, social work is, as I said, it's at a precipice. It's at a point where it can create a new vision for the social work profession. And being global, having a global perspective is a central part of that. So social work is global in its concerns. We know that social work problems are not just local, that they occur within and across national lines. And we know that there is learning to be had, learning to take place between cultures, between nations, between regions, and between parts of the globe. And so this new vision of social work foregrounds commonalities, common objectives, interconnectedness. It also looks for, through reciprocity, it looks for ways to promote social change, ways to look for systemic change, ways to span boundaries. As I said, social workers are boundary spanners. Social work should also always be critical, anti-oppressive, and anti-racist in its approaches. And we're learning more and more about each of these as we move into the future. We know that social work cannot be just a helping profession. It also must be a critical profession, a profession that looks at societal practices, as a profession that looks at societal structures, that looks at injustice and inequity, and that critiques that and offers new avenues for change, that it looks for oppressive practices and discrimination and works against them. And it looks for racism and sexism and all of the other discriminatory practices and works against them. So we talk about anti-racist social work, anti-oppressive social work, and critical social work. In some ways, these used to be thought of as radical social work. And there was a body of literature in the past 20 to 40 years that talked about radical social work. I would like to think that no longer are those ideas radical, but they are essential. They are ideas that are not fringe ideas in social work, but ideas that should be at the center of social work and that should. I'm going to skip a few of these, and I apologize for that. But again, I'll give you the slides. I just want to make sure we have time for questions. Amartya Sen talks about capabilities, the capability approach. And I don't know if any of you have studied that approach. But just as social work has been influenced by a wide variety of theories, community health, public health have been incredibly important. As I said, the social determinants of health. Sen talks about capabilities in social work. And it's a new way to think about social work practice that really emphasizes the capabilities, economic opportunities, social power, political liberty, and empowerment, and enabling conditions that lead to good health, education, and economic well-being in a community. And so these things are really important. The idea of capabilities is a newer way of thinking about social work, at least here in the US, but it's one that offers, I'm gonna skip this, it offers a fresh way to look at global social work. So what I have here is just a quick graphic that shows, let's see, hopefully you can see my mouse, that shows the various, not all, but some of the various stakeholders impacted by social work. So we have national and government policymakers, government, in your case, the various ministries of government in Indonesia. You also have local government policymakers. You have policymakers, lawmakers at both of these levels. You have international relief organizations like the United Nations, the Red Cross, the World Health Organization, and many others that provide relief across borders. We have the community and neighborhood level. We have families, healthcare systems, social service systems, and institutions, including the justice system, the carceral system, jails and prisons. All of these systems social work interacts with, trade unions and labor organizations, non-governmental organizations, or in your case, yayasans, NGOs. You have social activist movements. So we've seen in the United States, at least in the last 4 years, I would say, we've seen the rise of a number of very influential social activist movements, most prominently the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States. And we start to see that social work interacts with social activists. And there's an interaction and a discourse there that takes place. And then finally, we have academic networks and educators. And so all of these various stakeholders are interacting with social work, the social work profession. So you could think of this middle social work as being the whole profession, but also then individual social workers within that profession. And then over here on the right, we have capacity building, the removal of structural barriers, and then hopefully leading to social change. And so in the next slide, we start to see that as all of this, so we'll use Indonesia as an example, as all of this takes place in Indonesia, as the social work profession works with families, works with communities, maybe works with local government, works with healthcare, works with yayasans, works with social activists, educators, there is also increasingly a reciprocal relationship with other parts of the globe. And so we start to see across the globe that what happens in the US has implications in Europe. What happens in Europe has implications in Asia. What happens in Asia has implications for Southeast Asia and for areas like Indonesia. And so there are multifaceted interactions that take place and implications that take place. And so if you think, as I said before, of social workers being boundary spanners and social workers working across multiple levels, social workers have the ability to see these arrows. They have the ability to see what the relationships are. And if we can see what those impacts are, then we can know how to intervene at the international level. So just, very briefly, the international social work has been around for a long time. The International Association of Schools of Social Work was created in 1928, so almost 100 years ago. Also, the IFSW and the ICSW were created at the same time. Then in 1943, the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, UNRRA, was created. And we started to see social work spread around the globe, particularly after 1943 with that act. In the mid-1950s, the Council on Social Work Education, which is our accrediting body here in the US, started to define for the US what international social work practice was. At the time, and for several decades following the 50s, international social work was predominantly involved in relief services. So it would mean Western workers going to developing nations or to disaster areas in other nations and providing humanitarian relief. And that still remains a core feature of social work, but it's not the only one. So we now have, through our awareness of these global implications, if you think of those arrows, the two-way arrows between the globe and between your local community, your local nation, we start to see that there are new and complex social problems. So there are social problems that are arising out of that global interdependence. But we also see that travel has become easier. It's easier to get flights. It's easier to travel across borders. It's easier, at least pre-pandemic, it was easier. Maybe not so easy right now, but before the pandemic, it was easier to travel, and hopefully will be again. And I can take Professor Oman up on his offer to come to UMM, because I would very much like that. But there's new opportunities to share perspectives, to build partnerships across cultures and to learn from different cultures. So this notion that exchanging ideas and that what might work for a social problem in Indonesia has a learning lesson that could benefit a community in the United States, and vice versa, that what's going on in a rural area of the United States might have teaching lessons that could, and social work lessons that could benefit social workers and communities in Indonesia, is an important idea. So international social work, which I hope all of you as students, those of you who are students, will consider getting involved in, because it's so tremendously exciting. It's driven by notions of humanitarianism. It's often comparative in the sense that it compares cultures, that we look across cultures and we look at differences, but we also look at similarities and commonalities. In some ways, one way to think about international social work is that it can also be domestic. So there's international social work that happens just in the United States, but it's working with immigrants from other countries and refugees from other countries. Similarly, in Indonesia, if you have immigrants from other areas and you work with them, that is a type of international social work. It's not international in the sense that you're traveling to other countries, but you're working with people from other cultures, from international cultures. And so it's part of this global connectedness. And then it's important to say at the bottom too, that for those of you who are interested in policy, there are tremendous opportunities for getting involved in international social work at the policy level, where you can get involved with helping out with policy analysis, policy creation. We're starting to see here in the US, and you may see in Indonesia too, I hope so, that social workers are able to be hired and able to gain employment in legislative bodies, that social workers get involved and run for public office as social workers, that they don't just have to do traditional social work practice, but that they can also become lawmakers and become elected officials and start to change the policy discourse that happens in your nation. Just very, very quickly. So 4 types of Healy identified, and these still remain very, accurate. 4 types of international social work. The first is what I said is internationally related domestic work. That's what I talked about, working with immigrants and refugees and advocacy. Professional exchange. Now, that's where you might go to another country and work for a limited period of time, where you might go on a 2-week trip to provide relief in another country after a disaster. You might go to, on a learning trip to another country. One of the things that I've done as a faculty member here at the School of Social Welfare in Albany is I've been able to take 3 different times, I've taken classes of MSW students, master's students in social work, to other countries, and specifically to the United Kingdom, to Scotland. And so I teach a course on Scottish social welfare policy, and then I take students to Scotland, where they can have an international exchange with social workers and social work agencies in Scotland. They learn from social workers in Scotland, and the social workers in Scotland learn from them. And there's this rich exchange of ideas that happens. And those students then come back to the United States changed by the experience. And every time I talk to those students, they say that these international exchanges are tremendously valuable. So I would urge all of you, as you become social workers, as you qualify to be social workers, look for opportunities to travel, look for opportunities to engage in professional exchange. You have something to offer as social workers that other countries will benefit from and that you will benefit from learning. So we talk about information exchanges and looking at transnational problem solving. So there may be issues like human trafficking, for example, that happens across borders. And human trafficking is something that certainly with Southeast Asia has been a major issue, also with Eastern Europe and other areas. And so there are opportunities for social workers to get involved across borders to create transnational solutions to problems like that. Human rights issues, for example, are ones that work, that maybe collaborative projects can work together. So well, let me do this real quick. So the IFSW talks about several principles for international social work. And so I've taken this from the IFSW, and I want to acknowledge them because I think these are very valuable. And if you're interested in social work, please consider getting involved with the IFSW, the International Federation of Social Workers. So they have 6 core principles. The first comes from South America, from an indigenous movement, and it's called Buen Vivir. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but it's basically the idea that social, cultural, environmental, and economic issues swirl around each other. They're interdependent, they work together, and we look for a balance between them. And so it's that idea that social factors matter, that behavioral factors matter, that cultural factors matter, environmental and economic factors matter, and all of these things should be in balance, and that it's the job of social work to work at the intersection of these various factors. IFSW also says international social work is founded on love and care of people and the planet itself. So embedded in that, the planet piece is embedded in a healthy respect for and attention to the environment and environmental justice. And we're seeing increasing numbers of natural disasters around the globe. We're seeing climate change at a rapid level, and we're seeing much of it caused by human practice and human causes. And so it's important that social work takes care of the planet and serves as a role model to look for environmental change and environmental justice. Principle, responsibilities and rights is a principle. Respect, dignity, harmony, and justice. These are ideas that, as you know, are core to social work, but are especially important for international social work. Diversity, belonging, reciprocity, and equity. Again, all concepts that are universal within social work, but need to be foregrounded. And then the last one, which I'm most intrigued by and excited by, which is the African philosophy of Ubuntu, which some of you maybe have studied or heard about, maybe read about, as espoused by Archbishop Desmond Tutu and many others. So the phrase "I am because we are," and it emphasizes commonalities, universalities of all human beings, interdependence and interconnectedness with the environment. It's similar to the South American philosophy, but it's that idea that rather than looking at difference, we look at commonalities. And a little closer to home for you would be the philosophy Tat Tuam Asi, which may or may not be taught in social work programs in Indonesia, but is the notion that I am you and you are me, but that there is reciprocity, there's commonality, and it promotes a different way of thinking. Rather than a traditional way of thinking in social work, which is charity driven, which is I provide relief to you, I have resources, I provide those resources, and you are helped by those resources. That's a traditional view. A non-traditional view is more like Tat Tuam Asi or Ubuntu. Okay, so real quickly, I'm almost done here. Although I have a few pictures I'd like to share at the very end that I think maybe you'll enjoy. So if you're getting bored, I hope you're not, but stick around for the pictures. So some challenges with international social work. So because social work has been funded primarily at the local level, it's primarily funded by local governments and grants to local governments, at least in the United States, but I believe also in Indonesia, its focus has often been at the local level because that's where the funding has come from. So social work, even though we live in an increasingly globally connected society and we're starting to see these the impact of global problems, we are still operating at a local level predominantly as a profession. And so that's an issue. We need to start thinking outside of the local and start thinking at bigger, more nationally and internationally connected levels. So for instance, in the US, social work is viewed as a somewhat technical profession with licensure, regulation, training, certificates, and all of those things are great for professional prestige and for professional regulation. And yet those trainings predominantly emphasize local and in most cases, individual level interventions. We certainly have some focus on macro level interventions and community organizing, for example, but it's less of a focus than local, individual level of social work. So we also have challenges like limited resources, the money that is needed to engage in social work, the money that's international social work, the money that's needed to travel, the money that's needed to hire social workers to engage in international social work. We have hyper-localized service systems. So service systems that just serve local areas. So here in New York, we have service systems that only serve one county, one particular small unit of population. And so that's a limiting factor. And then there's also been a reluctance on the part of some social workers to engage in international social work, in large part because maybe they don't know about it, or they're overwhelmed by the idea of it and haven't been trained properly. They don't know what international interventions might entail. And so they haven't had role models. They haven't seen other people engage in international social work. So part of my challenge that I would voice to all of you, again, is as you become social workers, think about and consider engaging in international social work. And as you do so, being visible, being a role model for other social workers, being a role model for, I'm going to skip this, being a role model for other social workers who might engage in international work. So international social work still struggles for recognition and for permanence. It's been around for a long time, but it's still struggling. And so we all have a role to play to help in that struggle. More training and specialized training is necessary. We're at a very unique opportunity now to lead the way out of the pandemic, to lead the way to a new future, to engage in prevention programs, peace building programs. As I said, with social workers seeing multiple, social workers are people who look at multiple connections, multiple layers, multiple complexities. And that's the type of vision that's necessary for international work and for transnational work and for peace building efforts. So I, in the future, would like to see social workers involved in every layer of peace building efforts. And so that social workers do not think of their responsibility as just being local, but as also being global. So conclusion, last slide. Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, which is very familiar to all of you, the notion of unity through diversity, which has always resonated with me. It's you know, the national motto of Indonesia, which is beautiful. The idea of unity through diversity, that through diversity comes unity, and that although we live in diverse communities, diverse cultures, diverse geographies, diverse histories, diverse political economies, we are truly all connected together. And all of us on this call are connected as members of the social work family. Whether you're a lecturer, whether you're a university official, whether you are a student, whether you're a social worker, you're part of the social work family. And that family is not just local, it's not just national, it is global. So if you remember only these 3 points from today, this is important. So the first point is that we're truly connected as social workers. The second point is that social solidarity, again, that idea of unity, social solidarity is the most important thing to build resilient communities. Communities thrive when there is social solidarity. And then finally, we should learn from each other. So as social workers, we need to learn from our counterparts across the globe and work together to co-create a better future. Let's see if I can get to my, there we go. Terima kasih. I hope that each of you will also consider being in touch with me. Here's my email. I welcome email communications and I welcome visits to the US. And if, you know, if you'd like to visit Albany and see New York, we would welcome you with open arms. Professor Oman, how are we doing for time?
Okay, thank you, Professor. Well, before we have a discussion, I would like to a little bit to simplify or in conclusion in bahasa Indonesia supaya teman-teman yang lain bisa apa namanya bisa lebih memahami itu kuliah ini. Tetapi juga saya nanti meminta Mbak Wiwi untuk bisa Mbak Dewi maaf, sorry Mbak Dewi untuk sekedar memberikan komen atau apa begitu tentang pengalaman beliau di Amerika belajar social work, walaupun beliau dari Fakultas Kesehatan. Jadi ini menarik. Saya kira saya punya konklusi atau kesimpulan sedikit ya, bahwa perkembangan social work di dunia ini sudah begitu jauh dan kita tahunya hanya di Indonesia yang belum begitu berkembang ya, tetapi semua hal-hal perubahan sosial di dunia, baik itu perubahan iklim, perubahan akibat perang dan sebagainya, dan masalah ekonomi macam-macam, terutama kesehatan karena pandemi, maka kita harus bekerja sama untuk mengatasi semua itu di dunia. Jadi di seluruh dunia. Nah, ini perlu connection. Alhamdulillah kita ada Profesor Erik Hardiman yang barangkali nanti akan kita lanjutin dengan kerjasama. Jadi profesi social work itu bisa lebih luas dan Anda bisa bekerja di seluruh dunia, bukan hanya di Indonesia. Dengan catatan ya harus ada kemampuan bahasa internasional. Saya kira pengalaman saya sedikit satu kalimat aja. Pengalaman saya waktu saya melahirkan anak sang pertama di Amerika itu yang menangani kami itu bukan hanya dokter di rumah sakit, tetapi social work, lebih dominan social work daripada dokter. Contoh yang paling sepele tapi penting, misalkan bagaimana ketika hari-hari anak kami itu diminta oleh yayasan untuk dijadikan apa saya tidak tahu, tetapi dia izin dulu, social work memberitahu kami apakah hari-hari itu bisa diminta. Saya bilang kalau di Indonesia ini hari-hari harus ditaruh di suatu tempat seakan-akan ini adalah saudara anak saya, sehingga ini sangat sakral begitu, dan akhirnya tidak diminta, dan itu bagus sekali. Pengalaman saya berhubungan dengan social work di Amerika. Saya kira itu untuk kesimpulan saya. Tolong Mbak Wiwi ditambahin dikit. Mbak Dewi maaf saya komennya.
Oh, Prof. Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. Erik, and then Prof. Oman, and Bapak siapa ya?
Habib.
Oh ya,
Habib.
Ya, Pak Habib. Ya, terima kasih banyak. So, I guess this is a very good initiation from Professor Erik and then Professor Oman. So I guess the idea of being social worker is not only locally, nationally, but also globally. And then I thought that the idea that Professor Erik have bringing up in this presentation are quite well known. And then I guess students are also encouraging by having and providing the question to the Professor Erik. So at this point, I was pretty much welcome that the idea of the social worker probably in Indonesia has been initiated with the part of the medical social worker. But then I was just realized there is also the policy that have been issued by the government, how the social worker can work together in a medical field. But I guess there is so many things that we have to come up with this policy implementation. But at least, at least the idea are quite broad, and then the student got the new perspective that this is the being social worker is not only being a traditional profession, but also beyond of the traditional profession. So thank you very much to the Pak Erik for the very good presentation, and it was so thoughtful, and then have the thought meaning for the student as well. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah. So before we do questions, can I was hoping to show a few pictures just very quickly.
Yes, please.
Okay?
Yes,
Yeah.
okay, please.
Can everybody still see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so this was 2005 when I visited Jakarta to do the international workshop on addressing trauma and depression of the post-earthquake and tsunami through sport. And this gentleman next to me, who I'll show you in the next slide, is Dr. Rusli. And Rusli Lutan worked for, he's now retired, but worked for the Ministry of Sport and the Ministry of Education, and was in several universities as well. Was very, has written several books about sports and sport and health in Indonesia. These are our workshop participants. And you can see me, I look very young, no beard, many years ago. So this is one of the things I learned going to Indonesia. So we were brought to provide training around trauma. And we decided very quickly that it was important not to promote a Western approach to trauma, an approach that was central to the West. And I thought it was more important to incorporate Indonesian concepts, Indonesian culture, history, traditions. And so we, rather than delivering a traditional workshop, we involved the participants in small work groups. And this is an example of one of the work groups where I served as a facilitator, but the work group generated ideas themselves, ideas to address trauma in Banda Aceh after the tsunami. So all of these individuals were people that would go to work in Banda Aceh and use the ideas for interventions based on this workshop. So that was 2005. This is just another picture, yeah. These are my friend Charlie, who is now a professor in Yogyakarta, professor of sport, lecturer of sport science. And then my friend Andy, who's a wonderful friend. So now this is 2 years later in Bandung at UPI, delivering a trauma workshop at UPI. And you can see some of our participants here. There's two of us, two Americans. And again, we worked in small groups. And so you can see our work groups here. We also worked with youth, with children, to teach them how to serve as role models and to work through to use trauma interventions with children. So we were training the adults to provide trauma interventions with children. So this is me and some of the children on the playground. And they taught us to dance. So learning how to dance a little bit. This is at UNPAD in Bandung. So providing a lecture to a small social work class at UNPAD. This now is at the Yayasan in Bandung, where this is Tom and I worked with street youth. These were street kids in Bandung. And if you see these two gentlemen here in the back left, those are the twin sons of Harry Rusli. And I don't know if everybody knows who Harry Rusli was, famous Indonesian musician and artist, I believe. And these are his sons who run the Foundation for Street Children, Street Youth. And so we worked with them. This is at Pajajaran, UNPAD, Pajajaran, working with social work faculty at Pajajaran. These are some of the street youth at the Yayasan. This is now we're cutting, Dewi knows, this is my wife and daughter prepared for an Indonesian wedding. They were going to an Indonesian wedding. And so, Indonesian culture is embedded in my family as well. And just a few more. We have a tradition in my family in the US of inviting international students to our house for meals, particularly on Thanksgiving, which is one of our national holidays. And we like to have Indonesian members of the local Indonesian community to our house. So these are some examples, playing the piano at our house. This was years before you, Dewi. My friends Nisa and Darto. And then, so this is another example of our gathering, sort of an intergenerational gathering, intercultural, international, and intergenerational, all three. And then here you'll see someone you recognize, Dewi. So this is,
Thank you.
this is, I think from 2019, I believe, Dewi?
Yeah, 2019, exactly. Yep.
2019. So this is our traditional Thanksgiving meal to which we invited Dewi and then some other Indonesians as well playing card games here. So
Yeah.
that's my slideshow. That's it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes,
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Professor Eric.
absolutely. So questions?
I have some question. Firstly, from Pak Zainal. Excuse me. How is the this is Pak Zainal's question, Professor? How is the experience in the USA in building confidence strategies, especially on skills and capacity as social workers, especially when they work and meet other professions? Do you understand I'm sorry, question?
I think I understand. So
Okay.
let me, if you could summarize maybe.
Well, you know, because the social workers will work with other professions.
Yes, yes.
Okay, okay. Then, how is the strategies of building special skills?
I see. Yes. So we
In
have,
order to, yeah, okay.
yeah, we have in the United States a new and developing body of knowledge around what we call interdisciplinary social work. So social work whose main method, if you will, is working with members of other professions. So whether that be medical professionals, legal professionals, doctors, nurses, physical therapist, occupational therapist, whoever it might be. And so we've learned that there is a body of a knowledge and a set of skills in social work that are very specific to interdisciplinary practice. And so it's important to train our students in the use of those interdisciplinary skills. One of those skills is being able to very concisely articulate what social work is, being able to understand the interprofessional dynamics, being able to understand power dynamics. So we have power dynamics with doctors and psychiatrists having more social power, if you will, professional power than social workers. And so as the question's a good question, because social workers often don't have the confidence to fully speak up in those meetings and to engage in interdisciplinary social work effectively. So we've learned that if we can train them and give them practice in field settings in how to engage with professionals, how to deal with conflict when conflict comes up, when there are different values between professions. The medical profession may have a different set of values than the social work profession has. The justice, the judicial profession has a very different set of values.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Well, the next
Social
question
worker
is
needs to build confidence.
okay. The next question is from Yusril Juliansa. Okay, for the social work scope, just helping about environment and human welfare issues, or it can beyond then. Oh, I'm sorry. It can beyond than just helping people. Give me an example. Do you understand?
I think so. So you're talking about the distinction, I think, is the question. Let me ask this. Is the question about the distinction between individual level social work and more of environmental social work?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So the way I think about it is that even social workers who traditionally may have defined their jobs, their role as social workers individually. So let's say we have a social worker who provides individual level assistance, whether that be counseling or support services to an individual who comes to see them for help. That seems on the one hand like an individual level interaction, and it is. On the surface, it's an individual interaction, one-on-one, person-to-person help. But the social worker has a perspective that is aware of all of the multiple forces, the multiple factors impacting that person, including the environment, including the economics, including social factors, family factors, religious factors, economic factors, all of these things. And so the social worker is able to provide individual level work with an understanding of and an awareness of all of these other factors. But it goes beyond that. So it's not just an awareness. It means that the social worker can then and should, it does not always happen, but the social worker should provide interventions that allow that person to build capacities in these other realms too. So the person may come for only individual help about a psychological problem, but the social worker can help them build capacity in, neighborhoods, in communities, in economics, in social factors, and all these other areas, even though that person may not have come initially for that reason.
Okay, thank you.
I hope that helps. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Next question is from Berliana Oxtancia. Is there an it is a little bit rather posted individuals? Is there any aspects of your work experience that you didn't like, and was there any one of your researches that was most difficult to find out the problems and the solution also?
That's a very good question. Yeah, it's an excellent question. I think, the current project that I'm working on, my research right now is with veterans, with military veterans in the United States, and is about improving the social well-being of veterans. And so that is I would say the most challenging to me, and maybe it's because it's the most current and it's the one I'm thinking about the most right now, but we're trying to increase the social connectedness of veterans so that they do not engage in social isolation. So, and particularly after the pandemic, we see that veterans, but even before the pandemic, people who come back from serving in the military, exit the military, and then they join civilian society, they are very isolated by themselves. And so they don't have the support of others. And so everything I've done in my research is about how do we build the social capacity, the social support capacity, so that veterans can help other veterans, so that a veteran does not feel alone. So if he or she experiences difficulties, they have friends and supporters to help them. And so I think that's a universal experience beyond the military. So even people in Indonesia, and if you think of people in remote rural areas, that people may be socially isolated, how do we combat social isolation? How do we build communities and get people to connect with each other rather than remaining alone and separate? That's probably the biggest challenge.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have actually so many questions, but I think I just limit 5 questions only because of the limitation of time. Sorry.
That's fine, yeah.
Okay, next question is from Pak Hutri. Well, I agree with you about the globalization have as a byproduct of marginalization
Yeah.
of large group of people, including us in developing countries. But
Yeah.
actually, we have not another ways except the globalization for the West. So I think it is difficult situation for many countries, even in Asia and Africa also. We are not main players in the global context. Thank you so much. What is your opinion?
Well, I think it's an excellent question. It's very astute. Indonesia being one of the most populous nations in the world, it plays an important role whether you realize it or not. and simply because of the number of people, but also because of the location in the global economy. While you may feel marginalized and indeed be marginalized by some forces and factors of globalization, I think there is, in the future, there is an ability and an opportunity for Indonesia to play a much bigger role and to become better integrated into global economies. One of the, there are, so coming out of the pandemic right now, and also, the war in the Ukraine and the sort of global instability, if you will, and the global economic instability that we're currently facing with fuel prices, with economic insecurity and food insecurity, hunger globally. We're starting to see some destabilization of globalization, and I worry. One of my worries is that we'll move back into, and we've started to see this in the US, in France, and in some other places, with the rise, a reoccurring rise of nationalism and of nationalist perspectives. And so I think it's very, it's both a dangerous time because of the rise of nationalist forces and nationalist perspectives, but it's also an opportunity, and it's an opportunity to look for and to help create a new vision of globalization that is more inclusive of countries like Indonesia, that is less marginalizing to other countries and populations, and that is more inclusive rather than exclusive. Now that's a big challenge. It's not easy to do, but just like I think social workers should be at the table, social workers should be working towards peace at the international level. They should also be, in conversations at the World Bank, at the, IMF, and at different areas. For social workers should be educated and trained and able to engage in economic conversations that can benefit their entire nations. So I think social workers, again, I think we can be a leading profession. I think you can help Indonesia as a profession more than maybe you realize. So rather than just viewing social work as a helping profession that helps people in need, and that historically that's what it is, and that's a role of social work, but there is also this additional role globally. And I think we can look toward a better future globally that is more based on Ubuntu than sort of divisions and nationalism and borders.
Okay. Next question number 5 from Yan Xiang. I want to ask you how social work do for the US when the US had a problem with the price of gas because of the war, Russian war. It makes, of course, an effect of their life. Do social work have a participate to make a solution about this or not, and how the condition of the problem of gas in the US right now?
Yeah, it is a very difficult time here in the US right now, just as it's difficult everywhere. And I don't think it's unique to the United States, but the economic situation is such that the rising fuel prices, the instability of our financial institutions and the stock market and some of these things has led to a great deal of economic hardship for large portions of the population, for those communities which social work serves. The economic inequities, the economic inequalities are being amplified, exaggerated, not exaggerated, but increased. So in other words, the economic hardships are not faced by those with wealth and those with adequate resources. They're able to survive and able to go about life as before. But for people in poverty, who were in poverty before, their situations become exponentially worse. And so social work is in the process of figuring out how to help with that. I don't think social work in the US has done a great job. I'll be frank with you. Again, this is a very perceptive question. I think social work needs to be involved in that. We need to help individuals learn how to become economically independent. We need to advocate for cash transfers. We need to advocate for things like universal basic income. We need to advocate for better economic benefits for those in need. But we have a rising well of conservatism. We have a rising well of nationalism. We have a rising well of racism and discrimination. And politically, we are in a very fragile situation where things could turn, and social work will be even more challenged than it is right now. So I think the question is really good. How does social work respond in times of economic crisis? And we have a history as a profession of responding in times of economic crisis. But from my perspective, our response in a time of economic crisis should not be just reactive, but it should be proactive. So we should be looking toward educating communities, advocating for change, advocating for economic interventions, pushing for prevention rather than just working in a remedial fashion, if that word makes sense to everybody. Social work has predominantly been remedial in the sense that it's reactive. It deals with crises after they happen. I would like to see us become a profession that pushes into a more preventive perspective. And so we know what will happen as the crisis gets worse, and we can think of ways to address it, but we need the resources to do so and the willpower to do so.
Okay, thank you. Next questions. There are two more questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the end, I think.
Okay.
Next question is from Edwin. Is it important to Indonesian social workers to understand anthropology to work at their homeland? Actually, I will answer myself because I am the lecturer of anthropology. Okay, but I need your answer. Sorry. So
No,
do you understand?
I do. I think it's a great question. I would love to hear your answer. Why don't Professor Oman, why don't you take this question? I think it's important.
Okay. Well, next question is from Melatonisia. Melatonisa, sorry. Do social workers have received adequate legal protection? If it is so, what legal protection do social workers need?
Yeah. So, and I want to make sure we come back to the anthropology question in just a moment, because that
Okay.
that is important. But before we forget that, I'll answer this question first. Legal protection. Legal protection of social workers is very, very important. It's something that has become more and more developed in the United States over time, because organizations like our National Association of Social Workers, we have a very robust national group, professional group that that serves to advocate for legal protections, for laws that protect social workers, for laws that help social workers and enable the work that we do. Social workers need legal protections because the work can lead to legal situations. Hopefully not often, but it is important. So things like title regulation, who can call themselves a social worker, who can engage in social work, what happens if a social worker, if there's litigation, if a social worker is sued by someone, what happens if there's a negative outcome of a social work intervention and a legal proceeding takes place. Social workers need some sense of protection in order to have the confidence to do their work. Now, at the international level, looking at international social work, I think that is an area that is undeveloped. So what are the sort of transglobal and transnational legal protections for social workers? I don't think there are many. I don't think, because we don't have, we have universal rights, human rights, as monitored by the UN, but we don't have social work specific regulations that I'm aware of and legal protections. So we are at the mercy, if you will, of the legal system in any given country. So if I were to engage in social work in Malaysia, for example, or in Indonesia, if I came over and was providing social work interventions in those countries, I would be regulated by the laws and legal systems of those countries. I may have some protections. I may have some protections as an American social worker, but most American laws, most American legal protections are only relevant for the U.S. So that's an interesting question, and one that I'd like to think about some more.
Okay, thank you.
Were you
Well,
gonna say-
actually, there are about 300.
Excuse me, we haven't finished yet with the anthropology knowledge to the social worker. So Professor Ari will answer this such questions.
Okay.
Okay, Prof. Ari.
Yeah. So I think not coming from an anthropological background, I think, and so that's why I'm so curious to hear how Professor Oman will answer. But from my perspective, I think social work is a unique profession in the sense that we draw from a multiple range of academic disciplines. We draw from psychology, we draw from sociology, we draw from public health, we draw from medicine, we draw from anthropology. And so it is important and I think increasingly also economics. So it's important for social workers to be educated and trained in all of these areas. And so anthropology and the study of culture and the study of other cultures is really critical, because I think, and those anthropological processes and theories can really help guide how social workers think about social work practice. And it gives us a multidisciplinary way to think about what we do. So I think it's critical. I think it's really important, and I think it's a missing piece here in the United States, with some exceptions. Professor Oman, how about your answer?
Can you please answer how important is anthropology for social?
Yeah, I think like Prof. Eric said, there is anthropology is one of discipline, good discipline, itu important discipline for social work practice, both in micro setting, major setting, or micro setting. My interest is on social welfare movement based on sociology, I think.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, before I finish this session, I would like to say in bahasa Indonesia again. Sorry, Professor.
It's okay.
Jadi para mahasiswa, insya Allah kita akan ada session lagi seperti ini, mungkin dengan Profesor Erik, juga dengan Mbak Dewi. Saya kira ini penting karena saya kira social work di Amerika sangat jauh berbeda dan sudah jauh berkembang daripada di sini ya. Jadi oleh karena itu insya Allah Prodi akan memberikan layanan yang terbaik untuk Anda untuk diskusi-diskusi tentang perkembangan social work dan profesinya di dunia. Dan saya harap ada semacam fasilitas-fasilitas untuk Anda untuk bisa nanti kuliah S2 di Amerika, karena di Amerika kalau nggak salah social work itu hanya ada di S2, S1-nya bisa dari manapun. Yang kedua, nanti mungkin ada peluang-peluang pekerjaan di internasional. Kita akan berusaha dari Prodi untuk bisa menghubungi lembaga-lembaga internasional. Okay, I just want to close the session. Thank you. Ya, silakan Usul.
I think we still have one question left from the student named Marcelino Yaranga.
Sorry.
Yeah,
because I cannot read the chat. The problem.
So he or she, I'm not quite sure.
Okay, go on, Mbak Dewi.
Yeah. He was asking about whether the social worker in Indonesia have the sort of collaboration with the different countries. I'm not quite sure about this question, but I was just imagining if, let's say, being the healthcare worker, they do they have the certain requirement or can be able to work within the border course? So meaning that from Indonesia working to the different countries. I think so, because this is I was trying to make it simple, because they are just he was asking specifically as the social worker in Indonesia, do they have the specific collaboration or mutual of understanding between countries that they can work in outside of Indonesia? I'm not quite sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So
that's a very good opportunities.
But
I mean, there are, that's a good question that I don't know the answer to, but there are, some of the international organizations, and I think some of your Indonesian organizations, social work organizations, may have some of those answers and may be able to help facilitate international exchange, international collaboration, international, ideas. I mean, one of the things, just even informational exchanges, even regular meetings like this, conversations, discussions, between different countries and between different areas and regions can be very, very productive. And with Zoom and with our technology, it's much easier to have that international focus than it might have been before.
Okay. To end this session, I would like to invite you, Professor, to come to Indonesia again, especially to University of Muhammadiyah in Malang.
Yes.
We can, now Indonesian, the pandemic now it's not really happened in Indonesia now. It's finished, almost finished. So
Okay,
it's not very okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I would. Thank you.
Yeah, we are sorry. Actually, there are about 300 students altogether, but the problem is on internet connection.
Yeah.
So sorry for that. Okay, we'd like to see possibility and everything, or maybe student exchange and
Yes, yeah. I'm very open to that, and we are here at the university as well too. And Dewi knows quite
visiting
well.
professor maybe. So
Yeah.
many
Great.
we can
Great.
do together. Okay, thank you, professors.
Thank you, terima kasih, and sampai jumpa.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum.
Halo.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Eric, Hardiman, thank you, Mbak Dewi, thank you, Pak Habib, and thank you to all participants, especially my students of Department of Social Welfare, University of Muhammadiyah Malang. And I hope, Prof. Eric, this is not the last program, not the last agenda, but the first time for. I hope we can rank for any kind of academic agenda and so on, like Pak Habib said. Ya Pak Habib ya, okay. And then back to MC photo session. Yeah, back to MC. Thank you Pak Prof. Eric. Thank you.
Thanks to Professor Eric.
Mak.
Ya, silakan Bu Dewi. Okay, thank you. Please to all of our audience, please open your camera because we have a photo session. Boleh dipandu Pak Eko.
Ini foto session ya? Halo.
Iya, iya Pak.
Tapi Prof. Eriknya sudah live.
Sudah live ya.
Ya, sudah sign out.
Oke. Untuk open cam semua ya, teman-teman mahasiswa. Oke, ini slide 1, 2, slide ketiga, 4, 5, 6. Oke, terima kasih.
Terima kasih, Pak Eko. Alright, thank you to all of audience and Professor Eric, Bu Dewi, Dr. Habib, and Professor Oman for the lecture today. I hope it can develop our knowledge about what we're going to do as a social worker internationally. Yeah, and now is the and now is the last segment. Let's close. Yeah, let's close this lecture with Alhamdulillah. I apologize if there's any mistakes. Thank you for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Mbak Dewi, kapan ke Malang ke UMM?
Mbak Dewi masih jet lag gitu.
Mana Mbak Dewi? Udah tahu.
4 hari masih sudah hilang ya. Sudah hilang. Masih jet lag.
Mas, tolong dinyalakan lampu.
Mbak Dewi itu dosen FK.
Dikes itu ada di FK ya?
Iya.
Tapi tersendiri dari tersendiri ada.
Enggak, saya kira fakultas ilmu kesehatan itu termasuk ada kedokteran, gizi, terus macam-macam, termasuk keperawatan.
Prof. Oman izin live ya.
Standar banget. Jadi anu Mbak Roman.
Ini masih lanjut apa?
Nyalakan Mas. Nyalakan.
Saya nggak bisa baca chat.
Tadi pertanyaan-pertanyaan sudah direkap ya Mas Pak. Siapkan aja.
Sudah di copy belum?
Oke.